This point's going to be repeated several times throughout this text, namely that the inner state matters more than the outward appearance when it comes to spiritual realization. What that means is that a seemingly ordinary person, engaged in working, raising a family, paying taxes, and all the other trappings of material life, may be far more spiritually realized than a so-called yogi who sits silently in a cave, seemingly engaged in meditation. The operative factor is the state of detachment from the results that one is able to achieve, which, as we will see, ultimately leads to love of the Lord. Welcome back to Diary of Devotion's weekly series on the Bhagavad Gita. Today we're starting on chapter 3. This is such an interesting chapter because Krishna is going to continue to explain to Arjuna how to act in the world without attachment to the results of those actions, and thus be free from the entanglement of karmas and anxieties in this material world. Okay, let's jump into it. Text 1, Arjuna said, "O Janardana, O Keshava," those are other names for Krishna, "why do you want to engage me in this ghastly warfare if you think that intelligence is better than fruit of work?" You see, Krishna's just got done explaining to Arjuna that he needs to pursue the transcendental knowledge that will set him free from the attachments to the material activities that he's doing that is causing his anxiety ultimately. And it's proper that Arjuna's asking this question. Arjuna has already accepted Krishna as his guru, and here he displays the proper relationship between the disciple and the guru. A true spiritual teacher never expects the disciple to blindly follow his instructions or harbor some secret doubt that remains unspoken. Rather, it's the duty of the disciple to ask questions of the guru until he's satisfied and his doubts have been dispelled. And indeed, Arjuna's bringing up a valid point here. According to Ramanuja, we might ask, okay, so previously you said, Krishna, that it was the cessation of the senses that leads to knowledge of the self. If knowledge alone is the means to a vision of the truth, then what's the use of engaging in this battle? Okay, Arjuna's continuing here in text 2. He says, "My intelligence is bewildered by your equivocal instructions. Therefore, please tell me decisively which will be most beneficial for me." So it's interesting because actually there's no contradiction between the path of knowledge and the path of action. Arjuna, however, doesn't yet realize this. Let's see what Krishna says. In text 3, Krishna says, "O sinless Arjuna, I have already explained that there are two classes of men who try to realize the self. Some are inclined to understand it by empirical, philosophical speculation, and others by devotional service." Krishna begins to reveal to Arjuna that the path to the divine is variable, depending on the inclinations of the aspirant. As Ramanuja comments, it is not possible for everyone who seeks release from material bondage to immediately practice the yoga of knowledge. For some, the path of action must be perfected before any knowledge can be attained. So think of it like this. Just as an athlete may need to compete for many years in less competitive circumstances before rising to the level of a professional, so too might the practitioner of yoga need to practice a lower level before proceeding toward knowledge. Vishwanath Chakravarti concurs here and regards karma yoga as the initial stage before the practitioner proceeds toward jnana yoga, the yoga of knowledge. He comments that nowhere does Krishna say that both the path of action and the path of knowledge lead one to liberation. Rather, these are two stages along a single path. When on the path of action one becomes sufficiently detached from the results of one's actions and offers those results instead to the Lord, then he may proceed to the path of knowledge. The path of knowledge requires detachment from worldly pursuits and a strong adherence to yogic principles and practices. These principles and practices may be too stringent for a neophyte practitioner, leading ultimately to unnecessary delays on the path, or worse, to hypocrisy within the practitioner. Such a hypocritical practitioner may have the outward appearance of a yogi, but if he secretly harbors material desires and attachments, then his efforts are wasted, and he's liable to exploit whatever ignorant followers he may attract. Okay, Krishna continues in text 4. He says, "Not by merely abstaining from work can one achieve freedom from reaction, nor by renunciation alone can one attain perfection." So Krishna is making an important distinction. We must not mistake the outward appearance for the inner state. Although a yogi may appear to sit in one place engrossed in trance, in reality, his mind may be flying to every corner of the universe. Though his body remains still, his consciousness may be engaged in countless activities for which he harbors attachment. Ramanuja reiterates that this hypocritical yoga is pointless. Indeed, a spiritualist should practice in engaging in all the outward activities that are done by ordinary people, but inwardly, he should do so without attachment to the results of those actions. This point's going to be repeated several times throughout this text, namely that the inner state matters more than the outward appearance when it comes to spiritual realization. What that means is that a seemingly ordinary person, engaged in working, raising a family, paying taxes, and all the other trappings of material life, may be far more spiritually realized than a so-called yogi who sits silently in a cave, seemingly engaged in meditation. The operative factor is the state of detachment from the results that one is able to achieve, which, as we will see, ultimately leads to love of the Lord. Okay, text 5, Krishna says, "Everyone is forced to act helplessly according to the qualities he has acquired from the modes of material nature. Therefore, no one can refrain from doing something, not even for a moment." Now remember what those three modes of material nature are. That's rajas, that's the mode of passion, the mode that excites us towards action. There's tamas, the mode of darkness, which induces us to depression and sleep. And then there's sattva, or the mode of goodness, which brings fulfillment, happiness, and peace. Sometimes I may be more overcome by the mode of goodness, which makes me satisfied and peaceful. At other times I may be impelled to action, and at other times I may be impelled to sleep or depression. These are the three modes of material nature. And because we're compelled by the modes of material nature, acting within the world is inevitable for beings like us. Whether because of circumstances or our own inborn proclivities, we must always be doing something. Even while appearing to be still, the lungs still breathe, the heart still beats, and the consciousness is still aware. But if we're helpless to act, then are we condemned to live in this world of continual pleasure and suffering? Not so long as we renounce the attachment to the results of our actions, Krishna says. Okay, he goes on. "One who restrains the senses of action, but whose mind dwells on sense objects, certainly deludes himself and is called a pretender." This is exactly what we were just talking about, that yogi who seems to sit in meditation all day long while his mind races toward material thoughts. Once again, we see that the inner state holds the key to unlocking this mystery. If a yogi sits down to meditate, sincerely intending to control his senses and mind to the best of his ability, but still finds that such things sometimes escape his control, he incurs no fault. Indeed, in the practice of controlling the mind, it's to be expected that the mind and senses will wander. The key to success is to recognize when the mind becomes distracted, to gently let go of the objects of distraction, and to bring the mind and senses back under control once again. By repeated efforts, the sincere yogi's mind and senses gradually come under his control and remain fixed on a single point of concentration. This is the practice. This is what we do. Getting distracted and bringing our consciousness back to that point of focus, that is the process of yoga. It's not a mistake. And so if this process seems difficult, it's only because the practitioner has yet to achieve the strength of will necessary to undertake it. Much like an athletic endeavor, like weightlifting, a person must first begin with tasks he's able to perform. A beginner may not be able to lift his own body weight at first, and may be required to start with lighter weights. As Krishna demonstrates in the next verse, this approach can easily yield results. Okay, text 7, Krishna says, "On the other hand, if a sincere person tries to control the active senses by the mind and begins karma yoga without attachment, he is by far superior." That means superior to that hypocritical yogi who's only doing it for the outward appearance, but inwardly is harboring so many desires. Vishwanath Chakravarti comments here that Krishna indicates that even a person who stays at home and lives an ordinary life, but who acts according to the scriptural injunctions while remaining detached from the results, is superior to the hypocritical renunciate. Further, Ramanuja states that even though a hypocritical renunciate may have acquired volumes of knowledge on spiritual topics, he's still inferior to the ordinary man who has controlled his senses. Knowledge of spiritual topics is highly valuable, But if it's not accompanied by sincere practice, which leads to control of the mind and senses, there's still a risk of deviation from the path of spiritual realization. Worse still, there's a risk that such a renunciate may use his position of societal respect, being a religious man, to exploit others. I mean, think about it. That's the danger when one presents oneself as an authority on spiritual topics, but still harbors so many desires. The tendency to exploit through that kind of a position in society is almost inevitable unless one's sincere. Text 8, Krishna says, "Perform your prescribed duty, for doing so is better than not working. One cannot even maintain one's physical body without work." So Krishna's really hitting it hard here. Previously, Arjuna was making the argument that this war is abominable. This killing of our enemies is something that should be avoided at all costs. Better that we go out into the forest and meditate, becoming renunciates. Krishna's trying here to dissuade Arjuna from his illusions, saying, look, you're not going to get out of working. No matter what you try, you always have to do some work. And whether you fight in this battle or not, that work that you do, whatever it may be, has the potential to entangle you in material misery, that very thing that you think you're avoiding by running away from this fight. But if you do work in the proper way, it can be utilized as a tool for self-realization. And so in this verse, Krishna says, perform your prescribed duty. But what are prescribed duties? Prescribed duties means that which is obligatory. If one has a family or other dependents, it is obligatory to maintain them. It's also obligatory to maintain one's body, for such a body, although temporary and full of faults, is the vehicle for one's spiritual realization. The Vaishnava point of view believes in reincarnation, and we believe that we've gone through countless numbers of lives before getting to this one spot, getting this human body that's able to think and comprehend and move toward the divine. Such a rare opportunity as being born as a human shouldn't be wasted. The body has to be taken care of. For this body, although not spiritual in and of itself, is our vehicle toward the divine. Understanding that realization of the divine is the sole purpose for one's taking a human form of life, worshiping the Lord is also considered obligatory. Some religious practice is obligatory in human life. Sometimes that can take the form of an organized religion like Hinduism, Catholicism, Protestantism, Islam, whatever it might be. Sometimes people worship the divine spontaneously, without having any rules and regulations attached to it. But either way, we must worship the divine in this life. That is considered obligatory. And so thus, the sincere yogi should rise early in the morning while the mind is clear and unburdened by the daily activities yet to come, and focus the mind on the Lord. Just try doing your spiritual practices first thing in the morning. Get up early, an hour early, let's say, before you have to go out and do all the duties of the day, and spend that time doing some kind of a spiritual practice. Just see how easily the mind focuses at that point of the day. Later in the day, consumed by problems and obligations, the mind can be scattered, so the morning is the best time for spiritual practices according to this concept. Okay, so I'm curious about this concept of getting up early in the morning. If any of you have tried this in your spiritual practice, let me know in the comments below. What did you think about it? Do you think it helped you in your spiritual practice? And how might that have changed your consciousness as time went on and you began doing it on a regular basis? Okay, so through these obligatory practices, rising early in the morning, worshiping the Lord, and so on, will we one day reach a state of being in which we're qualified to give up all action? Although some do indeed strive for this, Ramanuja states that even in the state of perfect detachment, action is still superior to inaction. For the yogi pursuing the path of knowledge and inaction, eventually even the means for sustaining the body is given up. In this state, the body eventually withers and dies. And in that case, although the practitioner may have achieved such detachment that he doesn't even care for the health of his own body, that health should still be maintained. The proper function of all living beings is to serve the Lord within a loving relationship. No such service can be performed if the body is not able to do so. And so Ramanuja encourages us to act according to religious principles, take sustenance for the body, and maintain dependence, all with an attitude that such actions are actually being done to serve the Lord. So make no mistake about it, this is not a path of denial toward the body. We're not aiming to starve ourselves, to punish the physical form. We're aiming to utilize the physical form in the function that it was meant to do, which is to serve and love the Lord. So if you're hungry, eat. If you're sick, go to the doctor. Do all of these things that you would normally do to care for your body, but do so thinking that you're doing this as a service toward the Lord, that this body is a gift from the divine, and it's my responsibility to take care of it. Okay, that's it for this week. If you've got any comments or questions, leave them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Jai Shri Radhe.